Yes, I know. I just did a video on the Dragon God, but this is specifically going to be on Ignia and why I believe in full that Ignia will be one of the best protagonists, or sorry, best protagonists, best antagonists in recent Shonen, and I fully believe that. Given his competition, I would say he has the high potential value of being the number one in recent because I think that there has been some cool ones, but a lot of them are lacking in areas. Like when you have someone like Lucius, Lucius doesn't have a lot of large scale performance. He doesn't have a lot of that like room that a villain needs to really kind of show what exactly he's capable of. He's got kind of areas where you can fill that in somewhat, but it's not the same. He really needs some time just to kind of like be out there and do things. And someone like Sukuna lacks a lot of character depth. And he lacks a lot of just general background and kind of like getting to know him on a personal level. He's kind of just like people always say, like, he's so raw, but it's like, yeah, he's just raw, the character, and he doesn't have a lot else going on for him. Blackbeard is a high potential guy, but I still feel like Blackbeard, just based off of Oda's track record, is gonna like not and fully commit into a lot of areas. I could be wrong on that, but we'll see. I do like Blackbeard, so I'm not gonna downplay the guy too much. Shigaraki, I 100% believe he just lacks a lot of direction. He's a villain who has a nice build up, but he doesn't have a lot of follow through. It seems like after the point where he was like pretty much independent from All For One, he's just a mad dog who's just going rabid and on a rampage. Ignia has something that a lot of characters don't have when they become like big antagonists, and that is he has so much pre-existing lore that builds a lot of value before he even comes up to plate to be the villain. And what I mean by that is if you look at somebody like Aizen is a character I mentioned. He's obviously a fan favorite. Everybody pretty much loves Aizen for the most part. But the thing that Aizen really lacks as an antagonist is he lacks a lot of just general background. We don't really know what Aizen was like when he was younger. We don't really know what Aizen was like when he found out about the Soul King or where his direct drive comes from. We know that he doesn't like the Soul King. We know that he has this whole thing about not wanting what he calls more of a thing to be the pretty much head of everything and to be the focal point and center and sitting at the top on the throne. He wants it to be somebody more with like a vision and seemingly like an idea of what to do. And there's still value there, but it's like when you have a villain who has these grand, crazy ideals and designs, you should have an understanding more of like seeing what got them to that point. Like that's one of the things I've always had like a crux on Aizen is we never saw him finding out about the Soul King. We have no idea how he knows about this kept secret that there should relatively be no information in the Soul Society even find out about, but he just has it and so there's just stuff in there that it's like you need to have the bits filled in order to kind of like really get that completion. I that's one of the reasons I think Zareth is such an amazing, pretty much unparalleled antagonist in Shonen is he has the full package and he has relatively everything that you really would ask for an antagonist. The only thing you can really kind of get more from him is like more fights, but I mean that's more superficial than anything. But what I mean by all this is Ignia has a lot of just expansive information and like background pieces already established because of how he connects into the story. Because with Natsu, one of the big things about Natsu is obviously his whole connection with Igneel. Obviously, the whole background of how Zareth gave him to Igneel, and then Igneel started to actually understand the caring aspect of another being, as well as more care towards humans once he met Natsu. He says that he gave him the power to love, which is very important because when we get information about the dragon culture, it's literally that Natsu's relationship with Igneel actually changed the dynamics of how male dragons generally are, because they, as they are as a species, do not stay to raise their young. That's one of the whole things about why his statement holds a lot of weight and a lot of power when you go back and you read what he said and then connect it into information we got in 100 Years Quest. Because if it's normal in their society that, like, that they have a breeding season, the males and the females hook up, and then the females pretty much, they'll lay their eggs and then they'll raise their young. The males fuck off and probably very likely never meet their offspring at any point. So the idea of bonding with the child is completely foreign and unnatural to them. And even when it comes to the other dragons that had Dragon Slayer children, none of them seemed nearly as close as Natsu and Igneel were. They obviously had a closeness to them, but it never seemed like it was at the same level that Natsu and Igneel shared with each other. And why is that important? Because when we look at Ignia, and again, this a lot of this Ignia stuff is speculation. It's why I say, like, he has high potential. He's got a lot of just general stuff, but when it comes to, like, him in character depth, it's really looking at what's been presented. And so Ignia, as a dragon, they're not going to normally be like, oh yeah, well, they're going to think about their father, because it's not normal for them to really know their fathers. I would imagine not a lot of them seek out their fathers to find out information about them. Maybe in a case for, like, Igneel, just because he was a very renowned dragon who had a lot of glory and position to him as a fire dragon king. And as far as we know, he was even more just known across the dragon aspects and dragon realm, just from his position, his power, and his stance on humans. I know we don't have a lot of dragon kings and queens. I mean, you count Irene, but I mean, I imagine there were dragon queens as well. They don't seem to have much of a gender-based society. It's more just off of power for their species. And I would assume Alexion is up there, but we don't really know too much about Alexion. But with that, we've seen Ignia when he's talking about Igneel, and I very much believe that there is a lot of unanswered emotions. There's a lot of stuff buried, deep down in his being that we'll end up seeing later in the story. And I think that that's actually really cool, because, like, in a normal case where you have, like, say, some character, like a Shonen main character, for example, very easy one, obviously Natsu is a good example of that, who has these bottled up emotions about their father, a parent that disappeared in some way, shape, or form. It's a very reoccurring theme in fiction, but in a way that it is both positive and negative at the exact same time, because you have Natsu, who it was his driving factor. It was obviously a very emotional crutch to him for a long time, and then finally getting to him, it's a very strong moment for him as a character. But then when you look at Ignia, if we find out later, obviously Ignia has these, this inner sadness and depression around, his father. I think that'll be really cool, because it's like, well, you can be happy about Natsu, but then at the same time, it's like, well, that while it was beneficial to Natsu, it was painful to Ignia, and it gives a level of unfairness to it, because in Ignia's standpoint, if normally a male dragon is not going to raise their young, why exactly is Igneel raising not just another child, but a human? And that's going to cause a lot of just inner turmoil and confusion with Ignia. And I think that's one of the big value, just core aspects of his character, that is going to give us a lot of just general depth and a lot of exposition into who he is, how he operates, and what exactly is weighing him down. Because, like I said, in a normal standpoint where it's a normal character, it's, it's something you would understand. But if it's in a society and species where this isn't normal, the only way that he that led him to this point is he's questioning, well, what exactly is special about this guy? What exactly, changed my father? Why wasn't it me? I think that holds a lot of just emotional severity to it. It gives you a lot of questioning as to, well, was Igneel doing this fully good? I mean, I know that obviously he's not going to think about every single time he has any children. It wouldn't surprise me if Igneel has had other broods, but we just don't know about them, and because they're probably not going to be as important. Maybe we will find out about other children of Igneas or of Igneel at some point. I doubt it. It just kind of depends. Maybe Ignia will have one or two within his crew. It's one of those kind of questionable things that could be, could not be. It's just up in the air. But what would be really cool is if we had, like, say, like two other children of Igneel, but they didn't really care too much about Natsu being raised by Igneel. Whereas Ignia might have, like, differentiating between them would be really cool, because one thing about the dragon race we don't really know about is, one, we don't know about like where a lot of dragons were age wise, so it's hard to really differentiate the age of like when they were doing things. The only dragon we can really look at and say, oh yeah, he's probably post-Acologia age, is Ignia. And so, like, I think it makes a lot of sense of why someone like him wouldn't be in the same mindset as a lot of other dragons. He's not going to be thinking the same way as like a traditional dragon, because he didn't grow up in the same environment and the same mentality that all these other dragons had, where they're free roaming the world. The only thing that the dragons realistically had to worry about is if they encroached on the territory of another dragon that wanted beef with them. So in a post Acnologia scenario where you have to be careful and you have to hide because this guy could show up at any point and completely just slaughter you on sight just for your race, it builds a complete different way that he would mentally just go about his day. It would completely craft a mentality that's different, because instead of being this, having total freedom for the most part, species on top of the world, he's living in fear. And on top of it, there's probably some shame in there as well, and absolute just self sadness, because you're part of a race that used to be on top, and you were born at a time of fear and a time of genocide, to where you have no option other than to just be on your toes at all points throughout the day. And on top of a lot of these things, like I said, there's a lot of just general stuff towards him when it comes to his relationship with Igneel. And I think a lot of that's going to be seen once we see him actually interacting with Natsu more in the upcoming arc. But on top of that, we have just a lot of general exposition with him. And that's one of the things I really like about him, that I wish we would say have with someone like Lucius, is when you look at like right now, Ignia has over 130 chapters of just series presence, and every single time he's ever just shown up in an arc, he has taken the spotlight away from whatever else is going on. He's completely commanded the attention and the flow of events. Like when Mercphobia was having his fight, it was just this battle with the water dragon god. The question was, where is things going to go? How are they going to defeat him? And then once Ignis shows up, it instead goes of this complete shift in the story, this complete shift in what we know about Mercphobia, and instead it becomes this fear of what's going on with Natsu and what's to come with him. In the Dogra Labyrinth, it stops being about what's going on with the battle and completely shifted it into this sudden survival of, we need to deal with Ignia before Ignia just starts murdering people for fun. So when you have a character who, and on top of that, like I find it really funny because people bring up the Viernes fight and say, well, as long as he survives for more than 2 chapters, as if like all the other dragon gods didn't have long fights and performances. And it's like, who's even the shortest out of them? Like what, like Dogremag or Merc? And it's like both of them had pretty fleshed out, pretty good fights that were all different. Really was just Viernes. But like Igni has shown up twice and completely clowned on Natsu without even trying, and then just left. But Igni has just so much structure to him. He has so much presence. He has the backstory. He has in-depth lore that he hasn't. We don't have to wait for in full. We have enough information to build an idea of what we're looking at and what we're going to be dealing with, which I find extremely intriguing. It's like he's a character who showed up halfway done, like just based off of the stuff that we already have for him existing in the series and what we know. Like I said, the whole aspect about Igneel telling Natsu that he gave him the power to love another person back in Tartaros, and then the information about male dragons not raising their young, gives us already a double click into his backstory and tells us, okay, well, what exactly are we looking at? And then on top of that, the way that it mirrors how Natsu's relationship with Igneel or with Igneel worked gives further bits to really kind of assess at what exactly his character backstory, his deal is, what exactly is driving this man to have this position. And I think that to me is really really cool because like the idea is whether or not he knows about Natsu and E&D and stuff, if maybe he wants to have that death match with Natsu, not because of like, oh well, you guys defeated Acologia, so I think you have the potential to really push me. If it's more of I want to demonstrate you at your peak versus me at my peak and see which one Igneel was right to be around. And I think that would just show so much of his inner turmoil and really give us a massive view onto what exactly is giving him every single ounce of his character that put him at this point. There's obviously stuff that's going on top of that. I mean, I think that the fact that he's got such a cool personal one, goal with 1v1ing Natsu, but he also has this starting a new age of dragons as a secondary plotline going on. It just makes everything about Ignia lines up so well, and he has already all of this character information, a lot of these checkbox like marks that fit in him being like this upstanding villain. Because like I said, when you have a villain come in, there's stuff that you have to wait for in order to find out. For instance, and I'll use Sukuna again. Sukuna really needs stuff on his backstory. That's one of the things that people were really annoyed about is we haven't seen any of the Heinen era stuff. So anything about like him when he was actually at his peak, or not even at his peak, but just like him besides the current era, what exactly he was like, what exactly got him to these points. Where is he from? The small details about what make up the character really are important in understanding them. And somebody like Shigaraki has a lot of stuff that got us to that point, but he doesn't have a lot of follow through, and he doesn't have a lot for his character to really move past the point where it's like, okay, well, we got all of his back stuff completed. What's forward for him? And his forward stuff is just Rampage. It's one of those things where it's like you can look at these characters and you can say like, well, they've got a lot of good stuff in this area, but they're clearly missing a spot in another area. And that's why I talked about Aizen and Aizen's whole lack of character origin. I know some people are going to be like, oh, he doesn't need a backstory. You don't need to see child Aizen. It's not seeing him as a child. It's seeing the events that led up to a point and understanding why exactly they have these mentalities. Why do they have these goals? And we have the very unfair position, like I said, with Ignia, where because of pre-existing stuff in the story, there's a good amount that's already answered and that's already given to us and that we can piece together through just having read up into this point. And that's why I think Igni just holds so much general value. All he really needs, I would say at this point, is the follow through and presentation. There's not a whole lot else that he requires. I'm still really hoping that we get some bits of him and other people in his crew having like a relationship outside of like wanting to fight Natsu. I think that's a really cool thing in general for any antagonist, is seeing what they're like when none of the heroes are around and they're within range of maybe not like a direct friend ally, but somebody that they can kind of relax and just kind of be around. I think that would be really cool. It's like if we can get the Signario sisters just talking to him and he's just, gives a slight different presence to himself when he's talking to maybe some of his followers. Maybe we get into one other character that he's eventually considers to be a friend, kind of like Dogremag, because that was the thing with Dogremag, is I wish that we got a flashback that had him and Ignia kind of like conversing and interacting. I personally think that him and Dogremag being friends and having even the interaction that we saw was very powerful in just showing more sides to him, because the more human a character like this feels, the better, because he is not a human. He's a character who's of this apex species on their planet. He is a species that was uncontested until Acnologia, and he's a place within that species where he is pretty much uncontested for the most part. There's only a couple other people that hold any weight towards him, and right now the only other person is Celine. So Ignia is essentially borderline unmatched right now in their world. And on top of all this, if he acts more human instead of acting more dragon, that's just going to make his character more and more just expanded, fleshed out, grounded, and just feel more like a person and less like a big bad villain who is here to do big bad villain stuff. And those are going to be those things that really round out his character. Because somebody like this who holds that very large roster of different areas covered, and then if we can get more insight on just like him as a person, and then more interactions with him and Natsu. Because whereas like Natsu and Zareth had a lot of backstory, because of obviously the stuff with like Natsu not remembering it, you really only saw stuff in terms of the effect from Zareth's point of view and how Zareth thought about things. Natsu didn't have nearly as much impact from fighting his brother as say what Zareth was dealing with. So here, where Natsu is taking responsibility for Ignia and wants to deal with Ignia, it will lead into more that we can have, because Natsu doesn't need to have the pre-existing flashbacks and grow like knowledge of his parents in order to really kind of level with Zareth. Whereas with Ignia, it has more to do with Igneel, where he has way more of a direct memory and connection to him. So it's kind of like in that way the opposite. But Ignia, whereas Natsu would probably not care as much, having these memories that Zareth has, Ignia will probably be pissed off. Like, if you think about it, and he's, just the idea of this guy you're fighting, has all these cherished memories with your father who shouldn't have been around, another child and raising another child, while Ignia logically was at some point in fear hiding from the slaughter of Acologia. Because think about that too. That's just something I want to add in here near the end, is if you have this character who, again, normally wouldn't consider like his father helping him, but his father is doing something with a human, it's like, well, why isn't he protecting me? Why is, if he does care, why is he, pulling out of the time, where he's at to go hang out with some human and help some human instead of protect me? And then it's like, you can have just like a child Ignia cowering somewhere, terrified of the idea of Acologia showing up. Because like when you look at it too, it's like there seemed to be a level of almost responsibility that Igneel had towards it. So it's like, if you think about it, it's like, well, if it was his job, why did he leave? And then he made it so like, someone like Ignia has to live in fear. So there's just so much to Ignia right now that is both established and then pre-built. We don't like it's actually really crazy, because every single time we get something from him, you're able to build off of it with stuff we already have in the series that may or may not have been connected to Ignia, but then becomes connected to Ignia and can make us understand his character more. That's one of the reasons I'm so excited to start his arc, is because like with his character, you can do so much with just small amounts of exposition and display. Like for just like the amount of like, if we could see just a flashback of Ignia as a kid, he's in a cave and he's just scared, and like you see him sleeping and having a nightmare, and then like he thinks it's Acologia and he wakes up. If we get something like that, that would by itself, even like 2 pages, give us so much more insight and weight to his character. And I think stuff like that is going to be really cool to see go about, because it'll give us kind of like a combination of Acologia and Zareth, to where you have the presence of this big badass dragon, and then the ties to the main character in the cast, and have this much more fleshed out, grounded individual. But if it's done properly, I think that he could be better than any of the antagonists that we've had before. Because Zareth is an amazing character and has so much for the story, but Ignia has the potential to surpass him. But we just gotta kind of wait to see exactly what Mishima wants to do with that. But anyway, other than that, comment below. Tell me your thoughts are about this and what your stakes are with Ignia. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? And there's probably going to be somebody that's going to randomly comment on me saying stuff about these other villains in here, but it is what it is. I mean, you can hype up a villain and really like them, but it's like, if you look at an area where they're lacking, there's just, until that gets filled in, that's going to be a a bumpy spot in their overall performance. And that was one of the things that was a big complaint about Acnologia, is Acnologia, when he was just like this personification of destruction, we didn't need a lot of backstory and stuff for him. But when we started to get more to him as a person, it was like, well, we need now to have more of that information given to us, because now it's a problem if we don't get it. Whereas like Ignia is coming into the fray already with a lot of this on his back, pre-built, what we already have already just constructed, and it's really good when you look at it. Anyway, other than that, comment below, thumbs up the video, friend, like, button, subscribe, and check out my other videos. Other than that, I appreciate everybody's already subscribed, and thank you all for listening. Bye.